Dan Perry here with another Dan on Tech Python video. The for loop was often used when we knew how many times we wanted to go through the loop. We had a start and an end value, or we processed a list. Later we'll process a file, and so when we reach the end of the file. The while loop is very often used when you have no idea how many times you need to go through a loop. So we're going to modify this, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a list or add items to a list based on user input. We don't know how many items the user is going to enter, so going through a while loop allows us to go through until the user enters something that says quit. I'm going to create a list called cheese, and I'm going to make it an empty list. I'm also going to create a variable called cheese item, and I'm going to set that cheese item equal to a blank string. So now I've set up for it. In my while, I'm going to go through the while until the cheese item that the user enters is a Q. So I'm going to go while cheese item not equal Q. I could go ahead and make sure that they could enter an upper or lowercase q, but for our purposes, I'm not going to do that. Then in my while loop, what I need to do is ask the user to enter a cheese. And so we will say cheese item equals input So I have prompted the user to enter a cheese, and they're going to enter a cheese, and that cheese is going to be part of cheese item. In order to add something to a list, we say list, or the name of the list, dot append, and then what we want to append, which in our case is cheese item. And what that should do is output the element, what we entered as cheese item. It should append it or add it to the list cheese. After we finish the loop, let's output that list. So this print statement should print the cheese list. Let's run it and see what happens. When I run this, it says enter a cheese, so I'm going to say brie, and then I'm going to say feta, and I'm going to do American, and now I'm going to hit a Q for quit. And when it finishes, it prints that list, but notice that the Q is part of the list. If we walk through this, here's what happens. We initialize our list and our cheese item variable. We go in, since cheese item is empty, it is not equal to Q, so we go into the loop. It asks for a cheese. We enter the cheese. We add the cheese to the list. We come back up, check, because the first time I typed in brie, that's not equal to Q, so it goes back into the loop, continues there in the loop, asks for the next cheese, appends it to the list, that was the feta, goes back up, checks, it's still not Q, so it goes back into the list, asks for a cheese, I enter an American, it appends that to the list, goes back up. Again, it's not equal to Q, so it goes into the list, asks me for the cheese. This time I type Q. The next statement says append it to the list. So it appends it And when it appends it, it then goes back up to the top. Now it is equal to Q, so it says, hey, I'm at my exit condition, and now it comes, exits the loop, and prints that list, but the Q was part of it. How can we get rid of Q from the list? What can we do? Well, there's a number of ways of doing it, but the easiest way is we ask, after you enter the cheese, what we entered. Put an if statement in there. So let's do that. So I'm going to nest an if statement inside the while loop, and I'm going to say if cheese item not equal Q. Now it's going to ask me for a cheese. If I enter something other than Q, it will append the cheese item, because the if statement will be true. If I enter a Q, it will skip the if statement, so it won't do the append. Now it will ask me to enter a cheese item. If I enter something other than Q, it will go into the if statement, because that will be true. The cheese item is not equal to Q. Appends the cheese item to the list. Goes back to the top of the while loop. It's not equal to Q. Comes and asks me for another cheese item. If I enter a Q, then the if statement will be false. It will skip the if statement, go back to the top of the while loop. Now that becomes false because the cheese item is equal to Q, so it exits out and then it prints the list. Ask me for a cheese. I'm going to do brie. Let's do feta. And then let's quit. And now the list only has brie and feta, because when I typed the Q in for the cheese item and it checked with the if statement, this if statement was false and it skipped the append statement. So that way we can go in and we can use a loop to add items to a list when we have no idea how many items will be in that list. Thank you for watching this Dan on Tech video. Please subscribe to this playlist so you don't miss future videos. Please check out and subscribe to our other Dan on Tech channel playlists.